The night had settled over Seattle like a soft, heavy blanket, muffling the usual sounds of traffic and chatter. The streets below were mostly empty, just a few cars humming in the distance, their headlights gliding over the wet pavement. The sky was a deep navy blue, the kind that seemed to swallow up every thought you didn't want to face. From the small balcony on the fifth floor of her apartment building, Emily Parker stared into that darkness, holding a steaming cup of chamomile tea. It had been one of those days that dragged on for too long. Quiet at work, quiet at home, quiet everywhere. Her apartment felt more like a waiting room than a place to live. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound she'd heard for hours. She wasn't exactly lonely, she told herself. Just ... tired. Tired of the same routine, the same faces at the office. The same small apartment that never felt warm. No matter how many candles she lit, Emily wrapped her blanket tighter around her shoulders and sat down on the old wooden chair she'd placed near the balcony railing. The night air was cool, crisp, and smelled faintly of rain. From where she sat, she could see the glowing windows of the building across the street. Little squares of light, each holding a different life, a different story. Sometimes she imagined what those people were doing. Maybe laughing. Maybe fighting. Maybe sitting in silence like she was, wondering where life had gone a little off course. Her phone buzzed beside her. A text from her best friend, Laura. "You okay? Still working late again?" Emily stared at it for a second before typing back. "Just needed some air. Couldn't sleep." She set the phone down again without waiting for a reply. She took a sip of her tea and leaned back, closing her eyes for a moment. The night was beautiful in its stillness, but also unbearably quiet, and for reasons she couldn't explain. That quietness felt heavier than usual. Then she heard it, the faint creak of a door sliding open next to hers. It startled her at first. Hardly anyone used their balconies at night. Not in this part of the city where people mostly kept to themselves. Out of curiosity, she turned her head slightly, through the slim metal divider that separated her balcony from the one next door. She saw movement, a shadow stepping out into the dim light. Her neighbor, she'd seen him around a few times in the hallway. Usually early mornings when she was rushing to work. He always nodded politely, sometimes smiled, but they'd never spoken more than a quick hi. He was tall, lean, maybe mid-30s, always wearing simple clothes, jeans, a gray jacket, sometimes a camera slung over his shoulder. She'd noticed that camera more than once. He looked like the type of person who saw details most people missed. That night, under the faint glow of his balcony light, looked exactly like that, observant, thoughtful, quietly lost in something. He held a mug in his hand, probably coffee from the smell that drifted through the air. Emily froze for a moment, unsure if she should say something. Then he glanced over and their eyes met. It wasn't awkward exactly, just unexpected. He gave a small smile, the kind that people give when they're caught doing something completely ordinary but somehow meaningful. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked, his voice calm and slightly rough, like he hadn't spoken much that day. Emily smiled back faintly. "Seems like the whole building's wide awake tonight." He chuckled softly, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Maybe it's just us." Shh. They both laughed quietly, and something about that shared laugh eased the tension in the air. She didn't even know his name yet, but suddenly the night didn't feel so silent. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city filled the gap instead. Distant sirens, the wind brushing past the buildings, the soft sound of water dripping somewhere below from an earlier rain. He leaned slightly on the railing, still facing the skyline. "You ever notice how quiet the city gets after midnight?" he asked. "Every night," Emily replied. "It's almost too quiet sometimes, like it's waiting for something to happen." He nodded, looking thoughtful. "Yeah, it's peaceful though. I like it. Makes me feel like the whole world slows down for a bit." She smiled, studying him for a moment. His profile was calm, but there was something behind his eyes, a kind of tiredness that didn't come from lack of sleep. She recognized it because she carried the same look sometimes. "I'm Emily," she said. Breaking the silence, he turned to her, that faint smile returning. Daniel Hayes." Well, nice to finally meet you, Daniel Hayes. I've seen you around, you know? Yeah. He raised an eyebrow. I've seen you too. Always with a coffee cup in hand, heading out early in the morning. She laughed quietly. Guilty, coffee's the only reason I survive my job. What do you do? He asked. I'm a project coordinator at a marketing firm downtown. It sounds fancier than it is. Mostly emails, deadlines, and meetings about more meetings. He grinned. Sounds thrilling. And you? She asked, though she already knew about the camera. I'm a photographer, freelance. Mostly landscapes. Sometimes portraits. Been doing it for years, though lately... He trailed off, then shrugged. Lately, I've been taking fewer pictures and drinking more coffee. Emily smiled. Creative burnout. He exhaled slowly. Something like that? There was a comfortable pause after that. Not awkward, not heavy, just still. The kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Emily found herself looking out at the city again, but this time the night felt different. It felt shared. Daniel spoke again after a few minutes, his tone softer. It's funny, isn't it? How you can live right next to someone for years and never talk. She nodded slowly. I was thinking the same thing. Maybe everyone's just too busy pretending they're fine. He turned his head toward her. Are you fine? The question caught her off guard. She let out a quiet breath. I think I am. Some days more than others. You... He gave a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Yeah, same. They stood there for a while longer, not saying much, just letting the night fill the space between them. Emily felt something stirring inside her. Not attraction exactly, but a strange sense of calm she hadn't felt in a long time. Like maybe loneliness didn't have to be permanent. Eventually, she noticed her tea had gone cold. Well, she said softly, I should probably head in before I fall asleep out here. Daniel nodded, still leaning against the railing. Good night, Emily. Good night, Daniel. She turned to go, but before sliding the door closed, she glanced back one more time. He was still there, looking out over the city, the glow from the building lights outlining his shape against the dark. For some reason, that image stayed in her mind long after she went inside. Lying in bed later, Emily stared at the ceiling. She couldn't explain why that brief balcony conversation had stayed with her. Maybe because it had been so unexpected. It had been months, maybe years, since someone had looked her in the eye and asked how she was, really asked. Somewhere deep down, she hoped he'd step out again tomorrow night. Maybe they'd talk again. Maybe they wouldn't. But she knew this much. Tonight, for the first time in a long time, the silence hadn't won. The next few nights followed the same quiet rhythm. Around midnight, when the city dimmed and the air grew still, Emily would step onto her balcony with her blanket and tea. Almost every time, within a few minutes, Daniel would appear on his own balcony with his coffee. Neither of them mentioned it, but both noticed. It had become a silent routine, something unspoken yet expected, a small comfort in the middle of their lonely days. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. On the quieter nights, they just sat there, breathing in the cool air and watching the faint clouds drift across the Seattle skyline. It wasn't dramatic or romantic at first. It was simply peaceful. But peace, as Emily realized, could be powerful when your heart hadn't felt it in a long time. One night, the wind was stronger than usual. The balcony railings hummed softly as the air rushed through. Emily wore her gray sweater, her hair tied up loosely. She saw Daniel step outside, holding his camera this time instead of coffee. You actually take pictures at night? She asked. He smiled. Sometimes. I like how the city lights reflect on the water. It reminds me that even when things are dark, something still shines. That's poetic, she said with a smile. Do you always talk like that? He laughed lightly. No, just when I'm trying to sound interesting. Emily leaned on the railing, watching him adjust the lens. The camera clicked softly, and for a few seconds, all she could hear was that rhythm, click, pause, click again. It was oddly soothing. He lowered the camera and turned to her. You want to see? She nodded, stepping closer to the divider between their balconies. He turned the camera screen toward her, showing a photo of the skyline. The light stretched out like a constellation of gold against the navy blue sky. It was stunning. "Wow," she whispered. "You really see things differently." He shrugged modestly. "Maybe I just pay attention to the little things." She smiled. "That's something I should learn to do." He studied her for a second, like he wanted to ask something but decided not to. Instead, he said softly, "You seem distant sometimes, like your mind's somewhere else." Emily hesitated. "Yeah, I guess it is. I've had a lot on my mind lately." He didn't push, just waited quietly. That silence felt safe somehow, like she could trust it. Finally, she said, "I was supposed to get married 2 years ago, but it didn't happen." He ended things 2 months before the wedding. Said he wasn't ready. Her voice trembled slightly at the end. Daniel didn't interrupt, didn't offer empty sympathy. He just nodded slowly. "That must have been hard." "It was," she said simply. "For a long time, I thought something was wrong with me. So I threw myself into work, tried not to think about it. But some nights, it catches up, you know? The quiet ones, like this." Daniel looked down at his hands. "I know exactly what you mean." She glanced at him. "You do?" He took a deep breath before speaking. "My sister. She passed away last year. Car accident. She was only 25. The words hung heavy in the air. Emily's heart sank. "I'm so sorry," she said quietly. He nodded, his jaw tight. "She was the reason I started photography. She used to say that pictures were proof we existed, that moments mattered. After she died, I couldn't pick up the camera for months. I felt like every photo reminded me of what I'd lost." Emily didn't know what to say. She just watched him, the way his eyes glimmered in the soft city light. There was pain there, but also strength, the kind that came from surviving something you never thought you could. Finally, she said, "I think she'd be proud that you still take pictures." He looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression softened. "Maybe some nights I like to think she's still watching. Maybe she's somewhere out there laughing at how serious I've become." That made Emily smile. "She probably is." A quiet laugh escaped him. And for the first time since that night began, he looked lighter. After that, they talked for hours about books they never finished. Movies that made them cry. Memories that made them smile even when they hurt. Daniel told her about the time he got lost on a photography trip in Montana and ended up sleeping in his car under the stars. Emily told him about how she once dyed her hair bright red on a dare and spent weeks regretting it. By the time the sky started to fade from dark to gray, they were still there. The air had grown colder, their drinks long gone, but neither wanted to leave first. When Emily finally stood, she said softly, "I guess we should sleep." "Probably," he said with a small grin. "But thanks for staying up with me." She smiled. "Thanks for the company, Daniel." The next morning at work, Emily found herself thinking about him. It wasn't in a romantic way, not yet, but more like she had found a kindred soul. Someone who understood the quiet parts of life, the ones that most people tried to fill with noise. That night, when she stepped outside again, Daniel was already there. He looked tired but happy to see her. "I was beginning to think you'd skip tonight," he said. "I was close," she replied, laughing softly. "But I didn't want to break tradition." Over the following nights, their conversations deepened. They spoke about dreams they'd once had, hers of traveling through Italy, his of opening a small photography studio near the coast. They laughed about childhood memories, shared stories about their parents, even argued gently about the best kind of coffee, and sometimes they just sat in silence, watching the city breathe. The lights flicker and the stars blink faintly through the clouds. Those silent moments spoke louder than words ever could. One night, rain began to fall lightly, soft and steady. Emily didn't go inside. She liked the way it sounded, rhythmic and calm. Daniel stayed out too, his jacket damp but his expression peaceful. "It's strange," he said quietly, "how the rain can make everything feel alive again." Emily nodded, looking at the wet reflections of the city lights. "It's like the world's hitting a reset button." He turned to her, his voice low but sincere. You know, it's strange. I used to think peace came from being alone, from shutting people out, but lately I think it comes from being understood. Those words hit something deep inside her. She met his gaze, and for a moment, it felt like the city disappeared, like they were the only two people left awake in the world. I get that, she said softly. I really do. They didn't move. The sound of the rain filled the space between them. Daniel's eyes held a kind of warmth that made Emily's heart tighten, not from sadness, but from something new, something she hadn't let herself feel in years. She didn't know what this was. Friendship? Comfort? Or the beginning of something more? But she knew it mattered. It felt real, and that was enough for now. When the rain grew heavier, Daniel smiled faintly. You're going to catch a cold. Then you'll have to bring me soup, she teased. He grinned. Deal. The next morning, Emily woke up smiling for no reason. Her coworkers noticed. Her friend Laura texted, You seem happier lately. What's going on? Emily just replied, Maybe I'm learning to breathe again that night. When she stepped onto her balcony, Daniel wasn't there yet. She waited, sipping her tea, watching the clouds move across the moon. A few minutes later, his door opened, and that familiar figure appeared, tired eyes. Half smile, same mug of coffee. Thought you might have fallen asleep early, she said. He shook his head. Wouldn't miss this. Emily laughed softly. What even is this? He looked at her for a long moment, then said, Whatever it is, it makes the nights feel less empty. She didn't respond right away. She didn't have to. The truth was, she felt exactly the same. And as the wind swept gently across the balconies, carrying the faint scent of rain and city lights, Emily realized something quietly beautiful. Sometimes connection doesn't arrive with grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it just begins with two people, two balconies, and the courage to say hello. A week passed, and the nightly balcony talks had become part of Emily's life in a way she hadn't expected. Each night, she'd rush home from work, make her tea, and step outside hoping to see Daniel. Some nights he was already there. Other nights he'd arrive a few minutes later, always with his coffee. Always with that same calm smile that somehow made the whole day feel lighter. The conversations had grown deeper, more personal. They'd begun as neighbors sharing sleepless nights. But now they felt like something else. Two people finding comfort in each other's quiet honesty. Emily didn't know what to call it, and maybe she didn't want to. All she knew was that her nights no longer felt lonely. That Friday, the rain finally stopped after almost 3 days of gray skies. The city lights sparkled against the damp streets below, and the air smelled fresh, alive. Emily had just finished a long day of meetings and felt drained. But she smiled the moment she stepped onto her balcony and saw Daniel already leaning against his railing. You look exhausted, he said with a grin. I feel it, she replied, laughing softly. I think my brain stopped working around noon. Rough week? More like rough month. She sighed, sipping her tea. Deadlines, presentations, fake smiles. You know, the usual corporate routine. Daniel chuckled. That's why I quit my office job years ago. Couldn't pretend to care about numbers when my heart was somewhere else. Photography saved you, huh? She said. He hesitated, looking down at his mug. It did once. But lately, I'm not sure what's saving me anymore. Emily studied him for a moment. There was something different about him, that night of heaviness behind his eyes. You sound like someone who's about to say something serious, she said gently. He looked at her then, and the wind carried a faint sigh from his lips. I got an offer, he said quietly. A job in Vancouver. It's a big opportunity, magazine work, travel, exhibitions. Everything I've been trying to do for years. Emily's heart stilled. That's incredible, she said, trying to sound happy for him. Yeah, he murmured. It is. The silence that followed wasn't like their usual quiet moments. This one felt sharp, uncertain. The distance between the two balconies suddenly seemed wider. So, you're leaving? She asked finally. He nodded slowly. Probably. They want me to start next month. She forced a small smile. "Congratulations, Daniel. You deserve it." But her voice wavered just enough for him to notice. "Emily," he said softly, "you don't sound very happy about it." She looked away, her throat tight. "It's not that. I am happy for you. It's just—" She trailed off, unable to finish. How could she explain that the thought of him leaving made her chest ache in a way she hadn't felt in years? Daniel stepped closer to the divider between their balconies. "You've been one of the few good things about this place," he said. "I didn't expect that." She met his gaze, eyes glistening. "Neither did I." The city hummed below them, but for a moment the world felt completely still. Emily tried to change the subject to lighten the mood, but her words came out faint and clumsy. "Maybe you'll find better coffee in Vancouver," smiled gently. "And maybe you'll finally switch from tea to coffee." "It's never happening," she said, laughing softly. That laugh cracked the tension, if only for a second. They talked a little more about small things, safe things, but the air between them was different now. Every pause felt like a goodbye they weren't ready to say. When Emily finally went inside that night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the soft hum of rain returning against her window. Her mind replayed his words over and over. He's leaving. For years, she'd built walls around herself, convinced that distance meant safety. But somehow, Daniel had slipped past those walls without even trying. And now he was about to leave, taking something she hadn't realized she'd given him, her trust. The next few days were quiet. Daniel didn't come out one night, then another. Emily waited each evening, pretending she wasn't disappointed. She told herself he was probably busy preparing for the move. Still, the silence from his balcony felt louder than ever. By the fourth night, she couldn't take it anymore. She walked to his door, hesitated, then knocked softly. For a moment, there was no sound. Then the door opened. Daniel looked surprised, then smiled gently. "Emily, hey." "Hey," she said, trying to steady her voice. "You've been missing our midnight talks." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, sorry. I've been packing. Things got hectic." She nodded. "I figured. I just wanted to—" She paused, unsure how to say what she felt. "I wanted to wish you luck." In person, he smiled faintly. "Thanks. That means a lot." There was an awkward pause, filled only by the sound of rain tapping the hallway window. She glanced past him and saw boxes scattered across the floor, half filled with books, framed photos, and camera gear. It was real. He was actually leaving. She swallowed hard. "When are you going?" "End of the week," he said softly. "That's soon." He nodded. "Yeah," she forced a smile. "Then I guess this is goodbye." He looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head slightly. "No, not yet." And before she could respond, he reached over and gently took her hand. His touch was warm, steady, and completely unexpected. Emily froze, her heart racing. "I don't know what this is between us," he said quietly, "but it's real. I haven't felt something real in a long time." Her throat tightened. "Then why leave?" "Because I have to," he said, his voice trembling just a little. "This job, it's everything I've worked for. But that doesn't mean this." He gestured between them. "Doesn't matter?" "It does." Emily's eyes glistened. "You could have told me sooner." "I didn't know how," he admitted. "I didn't want to make it harder." They stood there, still holding hands, two people caught between what they wanted and what they couldn't change. The hallway lights flickered softly, and for a long moment neither spoke. Finally, Emily whispered, "Will you come out to the balcony tonight?" "One last time." Daniel nodded slowly. "Of course." That night, the sky was clear for the first time in weeks. The stars peeked through thin clouds, and the city below shimmered like a sea of gold. Emily stood waiting, her blanket wrapped tight around her. Then Daniel stepped out, coffee in hand, wearing that same tired but gentle smile. "So," she said quietly, "this is our last midnight." "Maybe for now," he replied. "Who knows? Life's strange like that." They talked like always about little things, memories, anything that made the moment last a bit longer. The laughter came softer now, bittersweet. When the clock neared 2 in the morning, the conversation faded into silence. Daniel looked out at the skyline. You ever wonder why some people cross paths for such a short time but leave such a big mark? All the time, she said. He turned to her. Maybe we don't need forever. Maybe some people show up just to remind us that we can still feel. Emily smiled sadly. That's a beautiful thought. He nodded. You gave me something I didn't know I needed, again, peace. Her eyes shimmered. And you reminded me that not everyone leaves because they stop caring. They both fell silent again. The wind carried the faint hum of the city, the smell of rain still lingering. Daniel glanced down at his mug and then at her. All right, he said. You better, she whispered. He smiled softly. Good night, Emily. Good night, Daniel. He lingered for a moment before stepping back inside. Emily watched the light from his apartment fade out, leaving only the glow of the city. She stayed on her balcony long after that, her tea gone cold, her eyes fixed on the skyline. She didn't cry. She didn't need to. Somehow, she felt calm. She realized that not every connection was meant to last forever. Some were meant to wake you up, to remind you that life still had warmth left in it. A few weeks later, she received a postcard from Vancouver. It was a photo of a sunrise over the harbor. The words written in neat handwriting on the back, found peace in the morning light. Hope you're finding yours too. Emily smiled as she placed the postcard on her fridge. The city outside her window was alive again, full of sound, full of stories. And though her balcony now stood quiet every time she stepped out at night, she could still feel the echo of that connection, the laughter, the words and the shared silence that had changed her heart forever. Sometimes, she thought, love doesn't need a beginning or an ending. Sometimes it's just a moment, a quiet midnight on a balcony that stays with you long after the lights go out.